Hello, everyone, and welcome. It looks like we are at the top of the hour and are so happy to have you joining us today for our session on understanding and combating contemporary anti-Semitism. We could not be more excited to have our guest expert, external discussant with us today, Sarah Markowitz. She is the Director of Education and Programs at the Jewish Community Relations Bureau and Global Jewish Advocacy Kansas City chapter. And she's here, she's going to be able to kind of share proactive approaches towards combating anti-Semitism through education to ensure just kind of a greater understanding of the Jewish community and to empower all of us to be allies in the fight for anti-Semitism. So we're thrilled to have you with us today, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining. And for all of you who are joining as you are entering the final stretch of the semester, thank you for taking time to be here to improve your own practice. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Sarah and have her kick things off. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you all for joining us on this lovely May 4th afternoon. At least it's beautiful here in Kansas City where I'm located. And thank you for making the time during your really busy end of school year schedules. I really appreciate it. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and we will get started. As mentioned, my name is Sarah Markowitz, and I am the Director of Education and Programs for the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, AJC. We are the Jewish community advocate for combating anti-Semitism and pursuing justice. We are a nonprofit representing the Jewish communities in all of Kansas, as well as Western Missouri, and we engage in matters of public policy. We proactively work to build bridges of understanding with our neighbors of all faiths and backgrounds, and we work to provide education and prevent and address anti-Semitism. We serve as the Kansas City Regional Office for the American Jewish Committee, the leading global Jewish advocacy organization, which has regional offices around the country and also many more offices around the world. And this presentation is part of JCRB AJC's proactive approach to combat anti-Semitism through education. Today, we're going to first discuss Jewish diversity and Jewish religious practices. Then we'll transition to talking about why we even need to be talking about anti-Semitism today. We'll identify what anti-Semitism is and what it can look like. And finally, we'll talk about how we can work to combat anti-Semitism together. Before we get into discussing anti-Semitism, we first need to ask and then answer the question, who are Jews? It's a really important question to ask because if people don't know who Jews are, then they won't know what anti-Semitism is. People think that anti-Semitism is about the Jewish religion, but it's actually about the Jewish people. The Jewish people are an ethno-religious group, nation, and tribe originating in the ancient land of Israel. Jews are best understood as being a people or a family. We are not just a religion, and we are not a race, even though we have been racialized. The majority of Jews practice Judaism, or at least are culturally associated with Jewish traditions, but others are not. And many Jews are atheists and not religious at all, but they're still Jews. So again, the best way to understand Jews is understanding us as being a people. We are a very, very small group. We only account for about 15 million people worldwide, which is about 0.2% of the world's population. And just for reference, before the Holocaust, there were 16.5 million Jews, so we still have not yet reached pre-Holocaust levels for a Jewish population worldwide. Here in the United States, Jews make up a whopping slightly less than 2% of the American population, and the Jewish community in the United States ranges from Haredi or ultra-Orthodox to secular and atheist Jews. Jews are also a diverse community. We span the full political and socioeconomic spectrum. There are right-wing Jews and left-wing Jews and everything in between. There are poor Jews and rich Jews, and again, everything in between. One area of anti-Semitism today is the accusation that all Jews are white, privileged, and powerful, and that is certainly not the case when we look at the diversity of Jewish life around the world. Jews are religious and secular in all our different ethnicities and races. Jews are not only white, European, Ashkenazi Jews like myself. My family comes from Eastern Europe and Lithuania, but there are Black Jews from Ethiopia, brown Jews from India, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews from North Africa and Turkey and Iran. In the United States, up to 15% of the Jewish community identifies as Jews of color. And in Israel, almost 60% of the Jewish population are Mizrahi Jews, so from the Middle East and North Africa. No matter where a Jew comes from, their ethnic background or the color of their skin, we all originated in the land of Israel and were forcibly displaced from Jewish homelands at various points throughout history. So given this diversity, characterizing Jews as only white or privileged or only a religious group really ignores history and also the present reality of the Jewish community. The color of a Jew's skin has not and does not protect us from anti-Semitic crimes, as we'll see. So how do Jews practice Judaism? I'm going to go over some major religious practices and holidays, but really there's no one way to practice Judaism. Again, you can be Jewish and not do any of the stuff I'm going to go over. Judaism is one of the three Abrahamic religions, so Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three religions believe that there is only one God. The essential difference between Jews and Christians is that Christians accept Jesus as the Son of God, but Jesus is not part of Jewish theology, and Jews do not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Therefore, our sacred texts do not include the New Testament. Instead, we have the Hebrew Bible, which some would call the Old Testament. The Torah are the first 5 books of the Bible, and some of you might be familiar with Genesis, Exodus, and a lot of those shared stories that are also central to Judaism. Within Judaism, there are 3 major branches, Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. Each branch has different levels of practices and religious observance. For example, each branch might observe different dietary kosher laws. So for example, some Jews will not eat pork or shellfish or mixed meat and dairy, but other Jews will eat bacon cheeseburgers. So having a vegetarian or a vegan food option is always a really easy way to be inclusive of Jews who do keep kosher, as well as other religious groups with dietary restrictions. Each branch may also observe the Jewish Sabbath, Shabbat, differently. So Shabbat begins each week before sunset on Friday and ends after sunset on Saturday. So a little bit more than 24 hours. On Shabbat, Orthodox Jews and other Jews will not work or travel on Shabbat, but others might. For our other religious holidays, the numbers of days which a holiday may be observed also varies from person to person, depending on their level of observance. And for more observant Jews, some of these holidays will also have the same restrictions on work and travel as Shabbat. So all holy days in the Jewish calendar will have that same level of restriction on work and travel as the Sabbath. Like Shabbat, all Jewish holidays begin at sunset and end at sunset, but that's not something that is always reflected on secular calendars or like a wall calendar you'll get from Hallmark or from Target. So it's really important to double check when Jewish holidays actually start. The Jewish holidays calendar that my organization sends out, which is on our website, always notes the evening that a holiday starts. Google is also pretty good at telling you the evening time that a holiday will start. So that is also a really good way to quickly check when a Jewish holiday is actually starting. The Jewish calendar is also a lunar calendar. So our holiday dates actually change from year to year. So instead of, Christmas always being on December 25th, our holidays will never quite be on the same day. There are a lot of Jewish holidays, as you can see from the calendars on the screen, but some of the bolded holidays are the ones that most of the Jewish community will observe to some degree, and those are the ones I'm going to go over quickly. So Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are known as the high holidays. These are the holiest days of the Jewish year. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the Jewish year, and Reform Jews will observe 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, while other branches will observe 2 days. Rosh Hashanah is typically celebrated by going to services at synagogue and by eating sweet food like apples and honey to symbolize a sweet new year. Yom Kippur is the most holy day of the Jewish year, and it takes place 10 days after Rosh Hashanah. It is observed by fasting and praying and by asking God and others for forgiveness. Yom Kippur is not a sad holiday, but it is certainly a solemn holiday. And in the past, I've had friends who knew I was observing a holiday and would wish me a happy Yom Kippur, which I appreciated the effort, but really for future reference, a more correct greeting for Yom Kippur would be, I hope you have an easy fast. And then once Yom Kippur is ended, we're continuing to celebrate the new year, and you can wish your Jewish friends a happy new year afterwards. Those two holidays will take place in the fall typically, and then in the spring, actually what we just finished celebrating about a month ago is Passover. So Passover celebrates the liberation of the Jews from being slaves in Egypt. It is an 8-day holiday. In the United States. In Israel, it's celebrated as a 7-day holiday. But in the United States, it's an 8-day holiday where many Jews will refrain from eating bread products and will instead eat matzah, which is unleavened bread. It kind of looks like a giant saltine cracker. If anyone's ever had the pleasure of trying it, it is not the tastiest food on the planet, but it certainly will do for 8 weeks. On the first 2 nights of Passover, Jewish families will typically host a ritual service called the Seder, which is it's a dinner meal that we follow a service, and it can last anywhere from an hour to 4, 5, 6 hours. In addition to hosting Seders on the first 2 nights of Passover, the first full 2 days and the last 2 days of Passover are considered holy days, which have the same restrictions on work and travel as Shabbat. While the dates of these holidays might change year to year, they will always occur in the same season. So the high holidays will normally take place in the fall, in September or October, and Passover will always be in the spring in March or April. So please make sure to keep these in mind as you're planning your classes or events or programs. If you are planning around, those dates in the fall or those months in the spring, just please double check when these holidays actually fall to not create any scheduling conflicts with these major holidays. Hanukkah is probably the Jewish holiday that you've heard the most about. Hanukkah is the festival of lights. It celebrates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, but it's not actually a major Jewish holiday. It just has become so, especially in the United States, because of its proximity to Christmas. But Hanukkah is not simply Jewish Christmas. Like all holidays, it changes year to year. So sometimes it's earlier and we get Thanksgiving-ka, and sometimes it overlaps with Christmas and interfaith families get to celebrate Christmas-ka. And I believe in 2024, it starts on December 25th and ends on January 1st, which is, I don't know what name they're going to come up with for crossing over into the new year. But during this holiday season at work and in your classes and life, it's really important to be inclusive with language and events and decorations so as to not isolate Jews or anyone else who might not celebrate Christmas. Saying happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas is such an easy switch that really helps us all to be as inclusive as possible for those who might not celebrate Christmas. All right, now that we have a better understanding of who Jews are, how many of us might practice, we can better understand what anti-Semitism is. But why do we need to talk about anti-Semitism in May 2023? Anti-Semitism, including violent anti-Semitism, has been steadily rising in the United States over the past 5, 6, 7 years. Since 2018, we have witnessed violent attacks on our community in Pittsburgh and Poway, California, in Jersey City, in Muncie, New York, and a little bit over a year ago in Colleyville, Texas. The attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2018 was the most lethal attack on Jews in American history. And in 2020, the FBI Hate Crime Statistic Report found that 58% of all religious-based hate crimes targeted Jews. 58%. That is extremely disproportionate, given the fact that, again, Jews account for roughly 2% of the American population. In May 2021, we saw a surge of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world after violence erupted in Israel and Gaza. Depending on the source you look at, we saw anywhere between an 80% to 141% increase in anti-Semitism in the United States in 2021, and this included physical attacks on Jews and vandalism of Jewish institutions. At the end of this March, ADL released their 2022 Audit of Anti-Semitic Incidents report. In this report, the Anti-Defamation League tabulated 3,697 anti-Semitic incidents throughout the United States. This accounted as a 36% increase from the incidents accounted for in 2021 and marks the highest number on record since ADL began tracking anti-Semitic incidents in 1979. This is unfortunately the third time in the past 5 years that the year-end total has been the highest number ever recorded for incidents. Anti-Semitism is unfortunately taking place here in Kansas City every day, especially in our schools. Our organization recently conducted a survey of Jewish middle school and high school students in our region and found that they face anti-Semitism on a disturbingly regular basis in their schools. Of the 83 responses we received, we learned that 89% of those students surveyed had experienced or witnessed at least one form of anti-Semitism at school or on social media. And these experiences ranged from the commonplace telling of quote unquote Holocaust jokes, the drawing of swastikas on desks and in textbooks, and the propagation of Jewish stereotypes and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. I always update this slide of my presentation with recent events, and quite frankly, I'm never at a loss of new events to add to this slide. And over the past 6 months, there's been no shortage of current events to cover. So as many of you might know, last October, the rapper Kanye West shared a slew of anti-Semitic content to his over 50 million social media followers. And since then, the Anti-Defamation League have documented at least 30 incidents that directly reference Kanye West. So there are very real-world consequences to what is posted online. Also last October, the basketball player Kyrie Irving shared the cover art of a book that you can see on the screen. And this book and also documentary related to it claims that Jews are not the real Jews and that the number of Jews murdered in the Holocaust was a major falsehood. Following that, at the beginning of this year, Joe Rogan drew backlash for spreading anti-Semitic tropes that Jews were greedy on his podcast. He said, "The idea that Jewish people are not into money is ridiculous. That's like saying Italians aren't into pizza. It's effing stupid." Joe Rogan's Spotify podcast is one of the most popular podcasts in America, and it averages around 11 million listeners per show. And to top it off, back in February, federal prosecutors charged a man with 2 hate crimes after he allegedly shot 2 Jewish men as they were leaving religious services in Los Angeles. Both victims survived, thankfully, and had been dressed in visibly identifiably Orthodox Jewish attire. And this shooter had allegedly had a history of harassing a former Jewish classmate. He had sent emails to classmates with anti-Semitic phrases and conspiracy theories, and blamed the Jewish people for the pandemic. In February of this year, the American Jewish Committee released its annual State of Anti-Semitism in America report, which assesses and compares Jewish and general populations' perceptions of anti-Semitism in the United States. This survey was one of the largest ever national surveys of American Jews and the general public. And the 2022 report demonstrated the deeply disturbing impact that rising anti-Semitism has on the American Jewish community. And I'm just going to highlight a few of its key findings. First, the report found that 41% of American Jews had reported that the status of Jews in the United States was less secure than it was a year ago. AJC also found that 4 in 10 American Jews had changed their behavior out of fear of anti-Semitism. So that looks like choosing not to go to synagogue, not to go to your local Jewish community center, choosing not to wear a Star of David necklace or a kippah, head covering, or choosing not to post anything online that would identify them as being Jewish. The report also found that 26%, about 1 in 4 American Jews, had reported being the target of at least one anti-Semitic incident in the past year. And they also, for the first time, asked about anti-Semitism in the workplace. And AJC found that 1 in 3 respondents said that they had avoided or changed at least one behavior in the past year. They found that 1 in every 12 Jewish employees felt unsafe at work expressing their Jewish identity. 1 in 10 avoided displaying something that would show their Jewish identity. 1 in 10 faced challenges when taking time off for religious holidays. And over 1 in 5 avoided discussing Israel, which is, to the majority of Jews, a very important part of their Jewish identity. In their survey of the general public, AJC asked about the knowledge of the term anti-Semitism, and they found that 69% of those surveyed had heard the term and knew what it meant, but 22% said they had heard the term but weren't really sure what it meant, and 9% said they had never heard the term anti-Semitism. When we consider the context of when the survey was in the field at the time, this was right around October when Kanye West and Kyrie Irving were in the news. So this could have contributed to an increased knowledge of the term anti-Semitism. However, anti-Semitism is an incredibly old, complex phenomenon, and it's likely that even those 69% aren't aware of some of these particular aspects of anti-Semitism that we'll continue to unpack throughout this presentation. Now that we've covered why we need to talk about anti-Semitism, let's actually talk about what it is. Simply put, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as a hatred towards Jews. Anti-Semitism is known as the world's oldest hatred. It is thousands of years old, and it's really embedded into societies worldwide in ways that are somewhat sophisticated and imperceptible if you don't know what you're looking for. You can kind of think of anti-Semitism as a virus. It never really goes away, and it especially resurfaces in times of economic or social stress and anxiety. Anti-Semitism is also persistent. It evolves and it adapts like a virus, and it fits itself into any group that is looking for a scapegoat. And because of this, anti-Semitism is not a partisan issue. It appears on the left and on the right in whatever form is most feared or hated by that group. So for example, on the left, Jews might be seen as white supremacists, capitalists, colonizers, things that a political leftist ideology might fear or hate. But on the right, Jews are seen as communists or socialists, or by white nationalists, Jews are seen as being responsible for white genocide or increased immigration, things that a rightist ideology might fear or hate. And that's why fighting anti-Semitism is so difficult. It comes from all sides, and we need to be swivel-headed when identifying it. When looking out for anti-Semitism, there are 5 main stereotypes and tropes, some of which you might be more familiar with than others. So the first is wealth. Jews are perceived to be overly wealthy, greedy, excessively materialistic, and money-oriented. Next, we have power. Jews are seen as being influential and in control of everything from the media, the banks, the governments, you name it, Jews control it. And this is what motivated the attacker on the synagogue in Colleyville, Texas at the beginning of the last year. This individual believed that these few Jews in a small synagogue in this small town in Texas had the power to pull the strings to have his demands met. Next, we have cunning. This is the idea that Jews gain wealth and power through manipulation and are not to be trusted. Following this, we have disloyalty. This is the notion that Jews are disloyal citizens whose true allegiance is to Israel or a hidden global Jewish agenda. And this trope is typically used to cast Jews as the other. It's also the what the stab in the back theory in World War I when Germany lost World War I and was looking for a scapegoat, they accused their Jewish German citizens of being disloyal, and it is one of the many factors that then led to World War II and the Holocaust. Finally, we have bloodthirstiness. This is the demonization of Jews as a primary source of evil in the world, and the view that Jews are inherently a subhuman, bloodthirsty people. In this age of social media, all of these tropes are often symbolized in cartoons and memes. And this meme on the right is known as the smirking merchant. It depicts derogatory Jewish stereotypes, such as a long crooked nose and kind of a grimy beard and curly hair. And it's popularly used to symbolize Jewish greed and control and cunning. In addition to these main tropes, we also have to look out for coded language. So words like globalist, elite, cosmopolitan, Zionist, all of these are dog whistles for the word Jew, and therefore the word Jew does not need to be mentioned for us to recognize something as anti-Semitic, or for another anti-Semite to be like, oh, you said cosmopolitan elite, I know who you're talking about. You're talking about the Jews. So if someone says the Zionists are controlling X or the cosmopolitan elite are responsible for X, they're really talking about the Jews. Kanye West mentioned this a lot when he first started outwardly accusing Jews of controlling the world on social media. He received backlash, and then he switched to saying, oh, the Zionists are doing this, when really he still meant Jews. Some people might repeat these Jewish stereotypes about Jewish wealth and power and think that they're being positive and complimentary. But in reality, these are ideas that have been used to justify violence against the Jewish community for centuries. And there's no such thing as a positive stereotype when we're talking about the Jewish community or any other group. Finally, you don't have to think you hate Jews to perpetuate anti-Semitism. You just have to unknowingly buy into these narratives and not understand the context and history of what you might be repeating. And that's why education is so important in the fight against anti-Semitism. The roots of anti-Semitism are envy and resentment and are traced back to before the time of Jesus Christ. Jews were blamed for killing Christ, for being followers of the devil, and for killing Christian children for their blood throughout the Middle Ages. These harmful rumors led to the murder of thousands of Jews, and Jews also faced expulsion from Christian lands during and after the Crusades, and the Spanish Inquisition was, of course, one of the largest and bloodiest of these expulsions. It actually wasn't until after the Holocaust did Christian leaders denounce Christian anti-Judaism. Of course, the history of anti-Semitism is not just limited to the West or to Christian nations. Jews also lived in Muslim lands well before the advent of Islam, and then they became dhimmi, or second-class citizens. While there was noted peaceful coexistence between Muslims and Jews, Jews also faced waves of persecution, violence, and forced conversions in those lands. And anti-Semitism in the Arab world increased in the 1930s and 1940s with the influx of Nazi propaganda and literature during this time. And Jews in the Middle East and North Africa faced a series of pogroms or violent attacks around that time as well. As European Jews were emancipated in the 19th and 20th centuries, they continued to be blamed for why things went wrong. The fictitious Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which the book cover is here on the left, was published in Tsarist Russia in the early 20th century, and this book centered on conspiracies of Jewish power, wealth, and plots to control the world's governments and economies. This is the book that really gave life to an anti-Semitism that was not just based on religion. It was published and widely disseminated here in the United States by Henry Ford in the 1900s. This myth of Jewish control or worldwide conspiracy also featured heavily into Nazi propaganda, which viewed Jews as racially impure and the cause of society's ills. This development of racial anti-Semitism under the Nazi regime, the hatred of Jews as a distinctively inferior racial group, is what led to the Holocaust and the murder of 2/3 of Europe's Jews. Overall, at its core, throughout history, and through today, anti-Semitism is best understood as being a conspiracy theory. To the anti-Semite, Jews are the someone in power, the source of evil, the reason why bad things happen. And looking at the meme on the right, you can see how long-standing these conspiracies about Jewish power are. This particular version of the smirking merchant meme is suggesting that the coronavirus was manufactured and is a hoax, and that Jews are encouraging people to get vaccinated, with the implication that Jews will profit off of these practices. And this conspiracy does a really great job of hitting on all of those 5 main anti-Semitic tropes that I mentioned earlier. This conspiracy component is really key to understanding why anti-Semitism is different than other forms of hatred, like racism, which often vilify their victims as being inferior, with the caveat of saying that, of course, Jews have also been historically vilified as being inferior as well. So Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, who is now currently the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, she's a prominent Holocaust historian. The movie Denial is about her, if you've seen that movie. Dr. Deborah Lipstadt has said that the racist punches down and the anti-Semite punches up. So what does that mean? If you look at racism, that form of hate is based on the idea that someone thinks that they are superior and people of color are inferior. So that can be viewed as punching down because the racist sees others as less than, less educated, less responsible, etc. And we can clearly identify those stereotypes as negative and punching down. Anti-Semitism, on the other hand, punches up. Anti-Semitism sees Jews as having too much of something, too much wealth, too much power, too much education, which, like I said earlier, might be seen as positive stereotypes, but they're not positive at all. This idea of Jews being cunning and evil and powerful was featured in this 2012 London mural at the top of the screen, which depicted stereotypically Jewish figures literally profiting off the backs of the oppressed. There is a very large blind spot in today's society when it comes to anti-Semitism, because here we have a minority, the Jewish community, who is being assailed because of perceived power. Because of the way that anti-Semitism functions, it's not always taken as seriously. In particular, these anti-Semitic ideas about Jewish power and wealth actually isolate the Jewish community from receiving support and allyship, even when we really need it. And thinking of Jews as inherently powerful and privileged is a function of anti-Semitism, but these are ideas that are so rooted into society that it takes a lot of work to challenge. Because anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory and is thus irrational, Jews are simultaneously accused of oppressing minority groups and also of working to overthrow the white race. So while anti-Semitism is a unique form of hatred, it also forms the core of white nationalism, which, as we know, also foments anti-Black racism, xenophobia, misogyny, homophobia, all these other forms of hatred that affects us all. Jews are seen as one of the primary targets of white supremacists because we're seen as the ones in power, the ones working to replace the white race by encouraging immigration, voting rights, things like that. And that's what those in Charlottesville meant several years ago when they were chanting, "The Jews will not replace us." That particular conspiracy theory is called the Great Replacement Theory. And the Great Replacement Theory is what motivated the attack on the Black community in Buffalo about a year ago now. And it also motivated past attacks on Jews in the Tree of Life Synagogue, Muslims in the mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the Latino community in the Walmart in El Paso, Texas years ago. Therefore, anti-Semitism is unique, but it's not an isolated phenomenon. The Southern Poverty Law Center has noted that we cannot dismantle racism unless we dismantle anti-Semitism. Because of this, what we're speaking about today doesn't just affect the Jewish community, it truly affects us all. There are 4 main categories of contemporary anti-Semitism that it is important to be able to recognize that I'm now going to go through, now that we have that foundational understanding. The first category is hatred towards Jews, which is probably the most familiar form of anti-Semitism for most of us. Hatred of Jews, which is the basis of white supremacy, is actually rooted in Christian teachings. Referring to Jews as Satan or the devil stems from some interpretations of the Gospel of John. And in medieval Christian folklore and artwork, Jews were depicted with grotesque characteristics such as devil's horns, sharp claws, jagged teeth, pointy ears, and other satanic features to portray the difference between Christians and Jews. On this image here, you can see Jews, which you can tell they're Jews based off their hats, depicted literally following the devil. Today, Jews are continued to be cast as Satan, demons, vampires, and dehumanized as generally being demonic figures. In Israel, the Jewish state is also demonized and, like the devil, is viewed as one of the main sources of evil in the world. The Islamic Republic of Iran literally calls Israel the little Satan and openly calls for Israel's destruction. In 2023, this form of anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews, actually comes from extremists in all religions, amongst all political ideologies. It's what motivated the attacker on the Tree of Life synagogue, and it's what motivated the neo-Nazi that attacked my own community here in Overland Park in 2014. The next category is stereotypes and scapegoating, which I covered a little bit before. We're going to look at a few specific examples. All of them are memes, which you can find on the internet. The first example on the left shows a mendacious and dehumanizing and demonizing meme of Jewish billionaire George Soros. And he's being depicted as an octopus with his tentacles wrapped around the world. This image is very reminiscent of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion cover that we saw earlier, and also of Nazi propaganda. George Soros, so those of you that don't know, is a Hungarian-born Holocaust survivor and billionaire philanthropist who mostly champions liberal and progressive causes. Criticizing Soros or his politics or where he donates his money is not inherently anti-Semitic at all. However, when he is used as a symbol for Jewish control, wealth, and power, this idea that he is some sort of puppet master conspiring to control the world's governments and banks, then that criticism is just an updated version of traditional anti-Semitic tropes. And you can really see that when looking at a meme when he's depicted as an octopus with his tentacles wrapped around the world. This second example in the middle has to do with conspiracy theories. Again, Jews are really blamed for everything and anything. Here you can see a tweet by an American politician blaming Jews for 9/11 while also using the dog whistle Zionists. And this conspiracy that Jews were responsible for 9/11 is not something that is lurking in the deep, dark corners of the internet. This is something that a former US representative felt comfortable posting to Twitter. And it's also something that Jewish students that I work with have been told by their peers. And finally, we see on the right, we see our friend, the smirking merchant again. And this meme is meant to portray the Jews as secret puppet masters ruling over others, controlling others. This quote is actually falsely attributed to Voltaire. It says, "To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize." And actually, this quote was written by a neo-Nazi who hates both the Black community and the Jewish community. The next examples we'll look at have to do with Holocaust memory. Holocaust denial and distortion are not legitimate Holocaust debates, but they're an attack on the Jewish people and Jewish memory. Holocaust distortion is the attempt to negate the facts of the Nazi genocide of the Jewish people, or a belief that the Holocaust did not happen or was greatly exaggerated. And we've seen so much of this form of anti-Semitism throughout the world, throughout the country, and especially in our region here in Kansas City in relation to the pandemic and mask mandates and vaccine requirements. People equating those policies with the yellow star that was used to identify Jews during a horrific and systematic genocide, that is Holocaust distortion, because there is absolutely no comparison between a mask mandate and the intentional murder of 6 million Jews. These false comparisons seek to trivialize and exploit the genocide of the Jewish people to make a political point. The second example we see here is the illustration of a cash register suggesting that Jews profited off the Holocaust. You can see that with the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau at the top, the number 6 million, and in the cash. This image was actually the 2016 winner of Iran's International Holocaust Cartoon Competition. You can Google the other entries into this competition, even though I don't really advise it. There is also a form of anti-Semitism related to the state of Israel. So what does this look like? First, a disclaimer: criticism of Israel is not inherently anti-Semitic. Political debate and protest is an essential part of democracy, and criticism of Israel, similar to that leveled against any other country, is completely legitimate. However, the line is crossed when Israel is demonized as being the Jewish state, or it's delegitimized, saying it has no right to exist, and saying that Jews do not have the right to self-determination, or when Jews are attacked or Jewish institutions are attacked as a response to Israeli policies or actions. So to look at a few examples, especially from May 2021, which, as I mentioned earlier, there was a surge of anti-Semitism, and this form of anti-Semitism in particular in May 2021. In Los Angeles, patrons eating at a restaurant were asked if they were Jewish before being physically attacked, and they were heard chanting "Death to Jews." A synagogue in Los Angeles, as well as synagogues across the country, were vandalized as if Jewish places of worship represent the Israeli government, which they do not. And online, Jews were singled out on social media in the comments section on posts not related at all to Israel. This Holocaust survivor, who's pretty popular on TikTok and Instagram for sharing her stories, received some pretty hateful comments in May 2021. On the top right, you can see an updated version of the blood libel, so the accusation that Jews murder children and drink their blood. This was a poster from an anti-Israel protest in May 2021, literally depicting the Israeli prime minister as a child-eating demon. And finally, this form of anti-Semitism is not just relegated to the far left. We also see it on the far right. This is a neo-Nazi flyer accusing American Jews of being a blight upon nations and calling on Jews to go back to Israel. So again, as a democracy, Israel has the right to be criticized. We can criticize our United States government, we can criticize the Israeli government, but it's really important to note where that line is when legitimate criticism no longer is legitimate and it crosses that line into anti-Semitism. So criticizing the Israeli government, Israeli policies, the Israeli military, and any policies and practices that demonstrate discrimination, inequality, or racism, completely legitimate to criticize. However, the 3 Ds is a really helpful framework for determining when language or images pertaining to Israel might become anti-Semitic and no longer are legitimate forms of criticism. And again, this is a form of anti-Semitism that is somewhat complicated to understand, but it leads to the attacks on the Jewish community here in the United States, and that's why it's really important to talk about. So after everything I've gone through, which is a lot, I understand, and we're coming to time for questions. After everything we just went through, what can you do in your place of work, in your own life, to support the Jewish community and combat anti-Semitism? The first step is recognizing anti-Semitism. It's really easy to recognize hatred and prejudice directly affecting Jews as anti-Semitism, but it's more challenging to recognize stereotypes or conspiracy theories or Holocaust distortion. And that's why I focus so much on identifying these various manifestations of anti-Semitism, because one has to understand anti-Semitism before we can take any sort of action to combat it. One critical tool for recognizing anti-Semitism is Translate Hate. It's a AJC resource that has over 40 terms and expressions that are either automatically anti-Semitic or can become anti-Semitic in a certain context. And we actually just looked at a number of examples from this Translate Hate glossary. This is a really fantastic resource. I really hope you'll take some time to look at it after this presentation and use it to continue to educate yourself and others after we leave here today. Once we can understand anti-Semitism, the next step is to say something, to respond, to raise awareness. It is especially important for non-Jews to raise awareness of anti-Semitism because Jewish people cannot fight anti-Semitism on our own. Again, we're 2% of the American population, 0.2% of the world's population. And it's not really our problem to fight. It's not a Jewish problem. It's a non-Jewish problem. The onus is on non-Jews to not let anti-Semitism be minimized or tolerated. So if you see anti-Semitism, now that we've built up this bank of knowledge, please say something and raise awareness. Like I said earlier, anti-Semitism is often perpetuated unknowingly. If you hear someone making an anti-Semitic comment like, the Jews control the weather, or all Jews are greedy, a good way to respond is simply by asking, what do you mean by that? Where did you hear that? And that kind of response gives the person a chance to reflect on what they said and maybe take a step back. And then it might give you a chance to explain that, hey, even if you didn't know what you were repeating, you just participated in this discussion at the beginning of May, and you learned why what they said was actually harmful and anti-Semitic. If your university typically issues public statements about acts of hate against other minority groups, please also consider issuing statements condemning anti-Semitism and supporting the Jewish community when appropriate. And please ensure that anti-Semitic incidents are taken seriously if they do occur. Often the Jewish community feels isolated, and we don't often hear messages of support from our non-Jewish allies. If you are on social media and you see one of the many memes that we looked at in this presentation, please report that post. Every tech platform has a way to report incidents. And there is also a report form on our website at jcrbajc.org if you are local and would like to report any in-person or online incidents of anti-Semitism to us. Additional concrete action steps to prevent anti-Semitism look like continuing to include discussions of anti-Semitism in the Jewish community in any learning and DEI opportunities, and by promoting awareness of Jewish holidays and Jewish diversity. For more recommended action steps, I would direct you towards AJC's Call to Action Against Anti-Semitism, which is a society-wide nonpartisan guide to providing various sectors of society with action steps to respond to and prevent anti-Semitism. And there's actually a specific action step for educational institutions, which I hope you'll take time to look at. Finally, you can also combat anti-Semitism by standing with the Jewish community and celebrating with us. We are celebrating Jewish American Heritage Month this May, and Jewish Americans have contributed to American society in so many ways, from serving in the government and the military to winning Nobel Prizes, leading universities and corporations, advancing medicine and healthcare, leading in the performing arts, influencing food and culture, and so much. There's a lot of challenges our community is facing, but there's also so much to celebrate. And at a moment where American Jews are particularly feeling vulnerable amidst a rise in anti-Semitism, there's no more important time than to celebrate the contributions of Jews to our society. So you can go to AJC's website for some really fantastic articles and videos and a little quiz you can take to test your knowledge. All right, again, thank you so much for having me here. I am available as an ongoing resource for you to provide any materials or guidance you might need regarding inclusivity, understanding, and security for the Jewish community. My email is here, and I also have QR codes that will take you to a quick feedback survey and to see some more resources as well. So again, thank you all for being here with me today, for being open to learning and being allies to the Jewish community. And I believe we'll use the rest of this time for some Q&A.